So let me give a little more of the theoretical version of it. For Nietzsche, power is always in some sense relational. It's not as though power is a thing that we can find in the world, but it is always a complex relational set of intervening and interacting effects. It's not always the best question to ask what are the causes. In some cases, it might even be, although it sounds oxymoronic, it might be best to say quasi-metaphorically, or maybe metaphorically, that power sometimes gives off effects where we have in what amounts to an absent cause. In other words, what the analysis really should look at are the effects and bracket out what might otherwise in a normal analysis be called the cause. Instead, these multiple effects, these relational effects, and to use some more terminology which isn't French, it's modern American lit crit terminology, these overlapping economies of power, of influence, of persuasion, of control, these macrological ones are not subject, as I say, to simple linear analysis in any one of the various modes that we might be used to it. You know, analyses of, in particular, ordinary analyses of political power. These can, let me see if I can cash this in with what I think is a very interesting example, and at least I hope it's a good example. And it should lead to the next thing I want to discuss, which is Nietzsche's view of history. I'm going now to refer to Michel Foucault's brilliant work, Discipline and Punish. And if you haven't read it, please read it, because it is a strange artifact, and it would not be possible without the influence of Nietzsche. And to discuss Foucault's Discipline and Punish will have us enter the terrain of the politics of reading Nietzsche, which I want to get onto now, which, as I said, might be a banal topic, but it's one I enjoy, so what the hell, I'm going to talk about it some. But Michel Foucault is someone who's made great and systematic use of parts of Nietzsche, the genealogical method and Nietzsche's sensitivity to these macrological relations of power. Now, for me, the best work by Foucault, as I said, is Discipline and Punish. And in that book, what Foucault is interested in is to do a genealogy of the forms of punishment and how they changed, if they did change, and in what ways they changed, between this period I have characterized as feudal to this period that I have characterized as modern. So Foucault starts his book with older forms of discipline and punishment. In fact, the first section is on the spectacle of the scaffold. And it begins with as gory a description as one could wish of an execution in France. Huge audience. Bring out this guy. I'm just going to gloss it. Don't want to read all that stuff. It'd turn this damn thing into a horror movie. But anyway, you have this huge audience for this execution. You bring out the guy. He's drawn, quartered, molten lead poured into here. Horses pull on him. The crowd is in an uproar. Scream and is tortured by it. Pull, pull, pull. Finally, they drag him up, and a prelate of the church comes up. The man still can speak, you know, and he confesses that he's done wrong and courageously states that now he's paying his price, his honor to God. You know. And then they burn him, you know, after using sulfur and so on. Well, you read this section in Foucault and you recoil in horror from those old feudal relations and how barbaric they were. And Foucault does his best to make it come alive for you, the conditions of possibility for those practices. The arbitrary rule of kings, you know, the necessity to give the crowd its spectacles, its festivals of atonement. It's important that the criminal there, you know, atone in a rather spectacular public way for his crime. Well, toward the end of this long and rather barbaric chapter in feudalism, which in this sort of feudal setting, Foucault begins to mention how the spectacle of the scaffold begins to die away under a rather strange condition of reversal. I hope this will make Nietzsche's genealogical idea clearer, too, as I use the Foucault example. The spectacle of the scaffold begins to die away. And one of the reasons that Foucault suggests for this is that who turns out to be the hero of the spectacle? The legislator or prince who condemned the man, the prelate who forgave him, or the suffering, wounded, courageous body of the victim. Imagine the crowds, you know, who they will eventually begin to pull for, as it were. Well, the insinuation by Foucault is this form of exercising power across the social body begins to undermine itself through a strange reversal, where the victim being slaughtered becomes, as it were, the center, the important focal point of the ceremony, and begins to win the sympathy of the crowd. And of course, that's not the idea of discipline and punishing in that period or in this one. It's hardly the idea, right, for the punished party to be the star of the show. Now, you may say, well, we've gone back to that in a way because there's one sure way to get a mini-series, and that's to be a serial killer. That's true under conditions that I will describe before the end of this lecture as postmodern. But right now we're going from feudal to modern. Under postmodern conditions, things have grown so bizarre that I'm not sure how I will use Nietzsche to help analyze them. But in any case, now I want to go from this feudal spectacle of the scaffold to the modern methods of discipline and punish. The horror sort of evoked in us by what Foucault does there is the horror simply at a past form of life in the way they punished people. Now, of course, what happens after that are there these great prison reforms in the 18th and 19th century. Utilitarians, for example, like Bentham, were very involved in prison reform and in ending this scaffold business and these public spectacles. No, they wanted clean, they had programs like Bush's, clean new prisons that were sort of humane, but enough of them. So Bentham and Foucault makes brilliant use of this. Bentham, the great utilitarian, interestingly enough, also came up with a great architectural design called the Panopticon. And it was a building where from the sort of top of the building, I wish I had a drawing of it here for you, but from the top of the building you can kind of see everything that goes on down through it. And each one of the cells facing in on them, where the prisoners are, have the peculiar characteristic that you're isolated so that you cannot see the other people, but as the guards walk through in surveillance, they can see you quite easily. And this was very important for the device itself. This is the surveillance aspect of modern power. And this is quite micrological. To give you an ordinary example of how modern power works in that way, you may be a perfectly honest citizen, a straightforward person, but when you walk into a department store, frequently you're being filmed and watched. And it's so ordinary, so micrological, so beneath the surface of your consciousness and everyday effects that you don't think about it. But you're being filmed and watched and surveilled as you walk through the mall, or as you walk through a department store, or as you drive through the city, the sort of omnipresent helicopter. It's not a paranoid delusion. You see them all the time. It's just that you forget because of their ubiquity. See powers like that. Sort of ubiquitously running here and there, it becomes easy to forget what structures our own power. It becomes easy to remember